Let me show you here. Chapter 10, by title Strider, in which we learn a lesson that we can apply to the elections in 2022. It's time to be done with that, guys. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. There was no light. Mary was not there. The fire had burned low. It was not until they had puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown a couple of faggots on the fire that they discovered Strider had come in with them, and he was calmly sitting in a chair by the door. "Hello," said Pippin. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I'm called Strider," he answered. "And though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me." "You said I might hear something to my advantage, I believe," said Frodo. "What have you to say?" "Several things," answered Strider, "but of course I have my price." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo sharply. "Don't be alarmed. I mean just this. I will tell you what I know, and give you some good advice, but I shall want a reward." "And what will that be, pray?" said Frodo. He suspected now that he had fallen in with a rascal, and he thought uncomfortably that he had brought only a little money with him. All of it would hardly be satisfactory to a rogue, and he could not spare any of it. "No more than you can afford," answered Strider with a slow smile, as if he was guessing Frodo's thoughts. "Just this. You must take me along with you until I wish to leave you." "Oh, indeed," replied Frodo, surprised, but not much relieved. "Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I knew a good deal more about you and your business." "Excellent!" exclaimed Strider, crossing his legs and sitting back comfortably. "You seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. You have been much too careless so far. Well, I will tell you what I know, and leave the reward to you. You may be glad to grant it, once you have heard me." "Go on, then," said Frodo. "What do you know?" "Too much. Too many dark things," said Strider grimly. "But as to your business—" He got up and went to the door and opened it and quickly looked out. Then he shut it quietly and sat down again. "I have quick ears," he went on, lowering his voice, "and though I cannot disappear, I have hunted many things and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen if I wish. Now I was behind the hedge this evening on the road west of Bree when 4 hobbits came out of the downlands. I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil or to one another, but one thing interested me. 'Please remember,' said one of them, 'the name of Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if my name must be given.' That interested me so much that I followed them here. I slipped over the gate just behind them. Maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful." "Well, I don't see what interest my name has for anyone in Bree," said Frodo angrily, "and I still have to learn why it interests you. Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it." "Well answered," said Strider, laughing. "But the explanation is simple. I was looking for a hobbit called Frodo Baggins. I wanted to find him quickly. I had learned that he was carrying out of the Shire, well, a secret that concerned me and my friends." "Now don't mistake me," he cried as Frodo rose from his seat, and Sam jumped up with a scowl. "I shall take more care of this secret than you do, and care is needed. He leaned forward and he looked at them. Oh, wait a second. I had the wrong voice. Apparently that's Aragorn. It was a new paragraph. Mr. Tolkien, how dare you do that to me? Make me stumble in my public reading. Now don't mistake me, he cried, as Frodo rose from his seat and Sam jumped up with a scowl. I shall take more care of the secret than you do, and care is needed. He leaned forward and he looked at them. Watch every shadow, he said in a low voice. Black horsemen have passed through Bree. On Monday, one came down the greenway, they say, and another appeared later, coming up the greenway from the south. There was silence. At last Frodo spoke to Pippin and Sam. I ought to have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us, he said. And the landlord seems to have heard something. Why did he press us to join the company, and why on earth did we behave so foolishly? We ought to have stayed quiet in here. That would have been better, said Strider. It would have stopped you from going. I would have stopped you from going into the common room if I could, but the innkeeper would not let me come to see you or take a message. Do you think he... began Frodo. No, I do not think any harm of old Butterbur. Only he does not altogether like mysterious vagabonds of my sort. Frodo gave him a puzzled look. Well, I have a rather rascally look, have I not? Said Strider, with a curl of his lip and a queer gleam in his eye. But I hope we shall get to know one another better, and when we do, I hope that you will explain what happened at the end of your song, for that little prank. It was sheer accident, interrupted Frodo. I wonder, said Strider. Accident, then. That accident has made your position dangerous. Hardly more than it was already, said Frodo. I knew these horsemen were pursuing me, but now, at any rate, they seem to have missed me and have gone away. You must not count on that, said Strider sharply. They will return, and more are coming. There are others. I know their number. I know these riders. He paused, and his eyes were cold and hard. And there are some folk in Bree who are not to be trusted, he went on. Bill Ferny, for instance. He has an evil name in Breeland, and queer folk call it his house. You must have noticed him amongst the company, the swarthy, sneering fellow. He was very close with one of the southern strangers, and they slipped out together just after your accident. Not all of the southern men mean well, and as for Ferny, he would sell anything to anybody, or make mischief for his own amusement. Well, what would Ferny sell, and what has my accident got to do with him? Said Frodo, still determined not to understand Strider's hints. News of you, of course, answered Strider. An account of your performance would be very interesting to certain people. After that, they would hardly need to be told your real name. It seems to me only too likely that they will hear of it before this night is over. Is that enough? You can do as you like about my reward. Take me as a guide or not. But I may say that I know all of the lands between the Shire and the Misty Mountains, for I have wandered them for many years. I am older than I look. I might prove useful. You will have to leave the open road after tonight, for the horsemen will watch it night and day. You may escape from Bree, or be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come upon you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible. The hobbits looked at him, and saw with surprise that his face was drawn as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. The room was very quiet and still, and the light seemed to have grown dim. For a while he sat with unseeing eyes, as if walking a distant memory, or listening to the sounds of the night far away. There, he cried after a moment, drawing his hand across his brow. Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough, yet. Tomorrow you will have to escape if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have him? There was a heavy silence. Frodo made no answer. His mind was confused with doubt and fear. Sam frowned and looked at his master until at last he broke out. With your leave, Mr. Frodo, I say no. This Strider here, He warns and he says take care, and I says yes to that. And let's begin with him. He comes out the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. He knows something, that's plain, and more than I like. But it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out into some dark place far from help, as he puts it. Pippin fidgeted and looked uncomfortable. Strider did not reply to Sam, but turned his keen eyes on Frodo. Frodo caught his glance and looked away. No, he said slowly. I don't agree. I think you are not really as you choose to look. You began to talk with me like Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and then ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business? And how do you know it? This lesson in caution has been well learned, said Strider, with a grim smile. But caution is one thing, wavering is another. You will never get to Rivendell now on your own, and to trust me is your only chance. You must make up your mind. I will answer some of your questions, if that will help you to do so. But why should you believe my story if you do not trust me already? Still, here it is. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Mr. Butterbur had arrived with candles, and behind him was Nob with cans of hot water. Strider withdrew into a dark corner. I have come to bid you good night, said the landlord, putting the candles on the table. Nob, take the water to their rooms. He came in and he shut the door. It's like this, he began, hesitating and looking troubled. If I'd done any harm, I'm sorry indeed. But one thing drives out another, as you admit, and I'm a busy man. But first one thing and then another. This week jogged my memory, as the saying goes, and not too late, I hope. You see, I was asked to look out for hobbits from the Shire, and for one by the name of Baggins in particular. And what has that got to do with me? Asked Frodo. Ah, you know best, said the landlord knowingly. I won't give you away, but I was told this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so. Indeed. Let's have it then, said Frodo, unwisely interrupting. A stout little fellow with ruddy red cheeks, said Mr. Butterbur solemnly. Pippin chuckled. Sam looked indignant. That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits, Barley, he says to me, continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. But this one is taller than some and fairer than most, and he has a cleft in his chin, a perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me. He said it? Who is he? Asked Frodo eagerly. Ah, that was Gandalf, if you know who I mean. A wizard, they say he is, and he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. But now I don't know what he'll have to say to me if I see him again. Turn all my ale sour or me into a block of wood, I shouldn't wonder. He's a bit hasty, but what's done can't be undone. Well, what have you done? Said Frodo, getting impatient with the slow unraveling of Butterbur's thoughts. Where was I? Said the landlord, pausing and snapping his fingers. Ah, yes, old Gandalf. 3 months back, he walks into my room without a knock. Barley, he says, I'm off in the morning. Will you do something for me? You've only to name it, says I. I'm in a hurry, says he, and I have no time myself, but I want a message. Walk to the Shire. Have you anyone you can send and trust to go? Oh, I can find someone, I says. Tomorrow, maybe, or the day after. Make it tomorrow, he says, and then he gives me a letter. It's addressed plain enough, said Mr. Butterbur, producing a letter from his pocket and reading out the address slowly and proudly. He valued his reputation as a lettered man. Mr. Frodo Baggins, Bag End, Hobbiton, in the Shire. A letter? From me? From Gandalf? Cried Frodo. Ah, said Mr. Butterbur, then your right name is Baggins? It is, said Frodo. And you had better give me that letter at once and explain why you never sent it. That's what you came to tell me, I suppose, though you've taken a long enough time to come to the point. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked troubled. You're right, master, he said, and I beg your pardon. And I'm mortal afraid of what Gandalf will say if harm comes to it. But I didn't keep it back on a purpose. I put it by safe. That I couldn't find nobody willing to go to the Shire the next day, nor the day after, and none of my own folk were to spare, and then one thing after another drove it from my mind. I'm a busy man. I'll do what I can to set matters right if there's any help I can give. You've only to name it. Leaving the letter aside, I promised Gandalf no less. Barley, he says to me, a friend of mine from the Shire, he may be coming out this way before long, him and another. He'll be calling himself Underhill, mind you, but you are to ask him no questions, and if I am not with him, he might be in trouble, and he might need your help, and you must do whatever you can for him. And I'll be grateful, says he. And here you are, and trouble's not far off, it seems. What do you mean? Asked Frodo. These black men, said the landlord, and then he lowered his voice. They're looking for Baggins, and if they mean well, then I'm a hobbit. It was on Monday, and all the dogs were yammering and the geese were screaming. Uncanny, I call it. Nob, he comes and tells me the two black men were at the door asking for hobbits called Baggins, and Nob's hair was all stood up on end, and I bid those black fellows to be off, and I slammed the door on them. And they've been asking the same question all the way to Archetai here, and that Ranger Strider has also been asking questions too. He tried to get in here to see you before you even had your bite of sup, he did. He did, said Strider suddenly, and he stepped forward into the light. And much trouble would have been saved if you had let him in, Barlaman. The landlord jumped with surprise. You, he cried, you're always popping up. What do you want now? He is here with my leave, said Frodo. He came to offer me his help. Well, you know your own business, maybe, said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger. Then who would you take up with? Asked Strider. A fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people keep shouting it at him all day. They cannot stay here on the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the black men off them? Me? Leave Bree? I wouldn't do that for any money, said Mr. Butterbur, looking really scared. But why can't you just stay here quiet for a bit, Mr. Underhill? What are all these queer things going on? What are these black men after? Where do they come from? I'd like to know. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't explain it all, said Frodo. I'm tired and very worried, and it's a long tale. But if you mean to help me, I ought to warn you there will be danger as long as I'm in your house. These black riders, I'm not sure, but I fear they come from Mordor, said Strider in a low voice. From Mordor, Barlaman, if that means anything to you. Save us! Cried Mr. Butterbur, turning pale. The name evidently was known to him. That's the worst news that's come to Bree in some time. It is, said Frodo. Are you still willing to help me? I am, said Mr. Butterbur. More than ever, though I don't know what the likes of me can do against, he faltered. Against the shadow in the east, said Strider quietly. Not much, Barlaman, but every little bit helps. You can let Mr. Underhill stay here tonight as Mr. Underhill, and you can forget the name of Baggins until he is far away. I'll do that, said Butterbur. But they'll find out he's here without help from me, I'm afraid. It's a pity Mr. Baggins drew attention to himself this evening. To say no more, the story of that Mr. Bilbo's going off has been heard before tonight in Bree. Even our Nob has been doing some guessing in his slow pate, and there are others in Bree quicker on the uptake than he is. Well, we can only hope the riders won't come back yet, said Frodo. Well, I hope not indeed, said Butterbur. But spooks or no spooks, they won't get in the pony so easy. Don't you worry till the morning. Nob will say no word. No black man shall pass my doors while I can stand on my legs. Me and my folk will keep watch tonight, but you had best get some sleep, if you can. At any rate, we must be called at dawn, said Frodo. We must get off as early as possible. Breakfast at 6:30, please. Right, I'll see to these orders, said the landlord. Good night, Mr. Baggins. Underhill, I should say. Good night. Now, bless me. Where's your Mr. Brandybuck? I don't know, said Frodo with a sudden anxiety. They had forgotten all about Merry, and it was getting late. I'm afraid he's out. He said something about going out for a breath of air.
Well, do you want looking after?
Well, you do want looking after, and no mistake. Your party might be on a holiday, said Mr. Butterbur. I must go and bar the doors quick, but I'd see your friend is let in when he comes. I better send Nob to look for him. Good night to you all. And at last Mr. Butterbur went out, with another doubtful look at Strider and a shake of his head. Then his footsteps retreated down the passage. Well, said Strider, when are you going to open that letter? Frodo looked carefully at the seal before he broke it. It seemed certainly to be Gandalf's. Inside, written in the wizard's strong but graceful script, was the following message. The Prancing Pony, Bree, Mid-Year's Day, Shire, year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here, and I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon and get out of the Shire before the end of July at the very latest. I will return to you as soon as I can, and then I will follow you. If I find that you are gone, leave a message for me here if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord, Butterbur. You may meet a friend of mine upon the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business, and he will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again, for any reason whatsoever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure that it's the real Strider. There are many strange men on the road. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows will spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken, and crownless again shall be king. P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber loom. A lumber room, things wanted always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell. Frodo read the letter to himself, and then he passed it to Pippin, and then to Sam. Really, old Butterbur has made a mess of things, he said. He deserves roasting. If I had gotten this at once, we might have been safe in Rivendell already by now. But what can have happened to Gandalf? He writes as if he was going into great danger. He has been doing that for many years, said Strider. Frodo turned and looked at him thoughtfully, wondering about Gandalf's second postscript. Why didn't you tell me that you were Gandalf's friend at once? He asked. It would have saved time. Would it? Would any of you have believed me until now? Said Strider. I knew nothing about this letter. For all I knew, I would have to persuade you to trust me without any proof if I were to help you. In any case, I did not intend to tell you all about myself at once. I had to study you first and make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I had made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked. But I must admit, he added with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe my looks are against me. They are that, at first sight, at any rate, laughed Pippin, with a sudden relief after reading Gandalf's letter. But handsome is as handsome does, as we say in the Shire, and I dare say we shall all look much the same as you after lying in days in hedges and ditches. It would take more than a few days or weeks or years of wandering in the wild to make you look like Strider, he answered. And you would die first, unless you are made of sterner stuff than you look to be. Pippin subsided. But Sam was not daunted, and he still eyed Strider dubiously. How do we know that you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about? He demanded. You never mentioned Gandalf until this letter came out. You might be play-acting spy, for all I can see, trying to give us to go with you. You might have done in the real Strider and took his clothes. What have you to say to that? That you are a stout fellow, answered Strider. But I am afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you. And I should have killed you already, without so much talk. If I were after the ring, I could have it, now. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand upon the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. "But I am the real Strider, fortunately," he said, looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will." There was a long silence. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. "I believed that you were a friend before the letter came," he said, "or at least I wished to. You have frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way that the servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand." "I see," laughed Strider. "I look foul and feel fair. Is that it? All that is gold does not glitter, and all those who wander, not all those who wander are lost." "Did the verse apply to you, then?" asked Frodo. "I could not make out what it was about. But how did you know that they were in Gandalf's letter, if you've never even seen it?" "Well, I did not know," he answered, "but I am Aragorn, and those verses go with that name." He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken, a foot below the hilt. "Not much use, is it, Sam?" said Strider. "But the time is near when it shall be forged anew." Sam said nothing. "Well," said Strider, "with Sam's permission, we will call that settled. Strider shall be your guide. And now I think it is time that you went to bed and took what rest you can. We shall have a rough road tomorrow, even if we are allowed to leave Bree unhindered. We can hardly hope now to leave it unnoticed, but I shall try to get us lost as soon as possible. I know one or two ways out of Breeland other than the main road. If once we shake off the pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop." "Weathertop?" said Sam. "What's that?" "It's a hill, just to the north of the road, about halfway from here to Rivendell. It commands a wide view all round, and there we shall have a chance to look about us. Gandalf will make for that point if he follows us. After Weathertop, our journey will become more difficult. We shall have to choose between various dangers." "When did you last see Gandalf?" asked Frodo. "Do you know where he is, or what he's doing?" Strider looked grave. "I do not know," he said. "I came west with him in the spring, and I have been keeping watch on the border of the Shire for the last few years, while he was busy elsewhere. He seldom left it unguarded. We last met on the 1st of May at Sarn Ford, down by the Brandywine, and he told me that his business with you had gone well, and that you would be starting for Rivendell the last week of September. As I knew, he was at your side, and I went away on a journey of my own. That has proved ill, for plainly some news reached him, and I was not on hand to help. I am troubled for the first time since I have known him. We should have had messages, even if he could not come himself. When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing, and the horsemen had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later they told me that you had left your home, but there was no news of your leaving Buckland, and I have been watching the East Road anxiously." "Do you think that the Black Riders have anything to do with it? With Gandalf's absence, I mean?" asked Frodo. "I do not know anything else that could have hindered him, except the enemy himself," said Strider. "But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than your Shire folk know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys, but this business of ours, will be his greatest task." Pippin yawned. "I am sorry," he said, "but I'm dead tired. In spite of all this danger and worry, I must go to bed, or sleep where I sit. Where is the silly...
Bless you.
I know that's how I am.
Perfect time.
Down.
Where's that silly fellow Merry?" It would be the last straw if we had to go out in the dark and look for him." At that moment they heard a door slam, then feet running along a passage, and Mary came in with a rush, followed by Nob. He shut the door hastily and leaned against it. He was out of breath. They stared at him in alarm for a moment before he gasped, "I have seen them, Frodo! I have seen them! Black riders!" "Black riders?" cried Frodo. "Where?" "Here in the village. I stayed indoors for an hour. Then, as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I have come back again, and I was standing just outside in the light of the lamp looking at the stars, and suddenly I shivered, and I felt that something horrible was creeping near me, and there was a sort of deeper shade amongst the shadows across the road, and just beyond the edge of the lamplight, it slid away at once into the dark without a sound. There was no horse." "Which way did it go?" asked Strider suddenly and sharply. Mary startled, noticing the stranger for the first time. "Go on," said Frodo. "This is a friend of Gandalf's. I will explain later." "It seemed to make up the road, eastward," continued Mary. "I tried to follow. Of course it vanished almost at once, but I went round the corner and on as far as the last house on the road." Strider looked at Mary with wonder. "You have a stout heart," he said, "but it was foolish." "Oh, I don't know," said Mary. "Neither brave nor silly, I think. I could hardly help myself. It seemed to be drawn somehow. Anyway, I went, and suddenly I hear voices by the hedge. One is muttering, and the other's whispering and hissing, and I couldn't hear a word that was said, but I did not creep any closer because I began to tremble all over, and then I felt terrified, and I turned back and was just going to bolt home when something came behind me, and I fell over." "I found him, sir," put in Nob. "Mr. Butterbur sent me out with a lantern. I went down to Westgate, and then backed up towards Southgate, just nigh Bill Ferny's house, and I thought I could see something in the road. I couldn't swear to it, but it looked to me as if two men was stooping over something lifting it, and I gave a shout. But when I got up to the spot, there was no signs of them, and only Mr. Brandybuck here, lying by the roadside. Then he seemed to be asleep, and I thought that I thought I had fallen into deep water, he says to me when I shook him, and very queer he was. But as soon as I roused him, he got up and ran back here like a hare." "I am afraid that is true," said Mary, "though I don't know what I said. I had an ugly dream, which I can't remember, and it all went to pieces. I don't know what came over me." "I do," said Strider. "The Black Breath. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed through the south gate in secret. They will know all the news by now, for they have visited Bill Ferny, and probably that southerner is a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Bree." "What will happen?" said Mary. "Will they attack the inn?" "No, I think not," said Strider. "They are not all here yet, and in any case that is not their way. In dark and loneliness they are strongest. They will not openly attack a house when there are lights and many people, not until they are desperate, not while all the long leagues of Eriador still lie before us. But their power is in terror, and already some in Bree are in their clutch. They will drive these wretches to some evil work, Ferny, and some of the strangers, and maybe the gatekeeper too. They had words with Harry at the West Gate on Monday. I was watching them. He was white and shaking when they left." "We seem to have enemies all around," said Frodo. "What are we to do?" "Stay here. Do not return to your rooms. They are sure to have found out which those are. The hobbit rooms have windows looking north and close to the ground. We will all remain together and bar this window and this door. But first, Nob and I will fetch your luggage." While Strider was gone, Frodo gave Mary a rapid account of all that had happened since supper. Mary was still reading and pondering Gandalf's letter when Strider and Nob returned. "Well, masters," said Nob, "I ruffled up the clothes and put a bolster down the middle of each of your beds, and I made a nice imitation of your head with a brown woolen mat, Underhill, sir," he added with a grin. Pippin laughed. "Very lifelike," he said. "But what will happen when they have penetrated the disguise?" "We shall see," said Strider. "Let us hope to hold the fort until morning. Good night to you, said Nob, and he went off to take his part in watching the doors. Their bags and their gear they piled up on the parlor floor. They pushed a low chair against the door, and they shut the window. Peering out, Frodo saw that the night was still clear. The sickle was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill. The sickle is the hobbit's name for the plow, or the great bear. Then they closed and barred the heavy inside shutters, and they drew the curtains together, and Strider built up the fire and blew out all the candles. The hobbits lay down upon blankets with their feet towards the hearth, but Strider settled himself into a chair against the door. They talked for a little, for Merry still had several questions to ask. Jumped over the moon, chuckled Merry as he rolled himself up in his blanket. Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing that for 100 years hence. I hope so, said Strider. And they all fell silent, and one by one the hobbits dropped off to sleep.
So it looks like that the hobbits got tired.
How are we doing for time? I think that's good. That's a chapter anyway. Only 36 minutes tonight. Normally they're about 45
What's
minutes
the
to
next
an
chapter
hour.
called, Betty?
Oh no, because I started at 15, so it was only 15 minutes for a chapter.
Yep.
I've only been reading 15 minutes.
Tonight is time change.
Oh yes. Are we
Yeah.
leaping forward or are we falling back?
Falling back. So let's do one more.
So we get an extra hour tonight?
Have you had enough? You've probably had enough. I really don't think I've had enough video games tonight. Okay.
Well, they could go to bed and read before
They could
getting
go
up
to
for
bed.
church tomorrow. All right, so what did we learn from this chapter called Strider that we can apply to the elections?
Don't trust shady people.
Yes.
Don't know whether off with a blind
So,
bird.
so we're either reading another chapter or we're going to bed. Is that the option?
Yep.
Okay. So what are the
Don't
options?
know whether or
You
not
guys
with a
wanna
black
do?
rabbit. That's been way
It
late.
needs to get better.
Need bedtime?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I do terrible against
I agree with
black
that. You guys can.